Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Touched by the Devil by Joanna Blake. Narrated by Duran and Kendall Taylor. 5 years ago, Mac. Mac! Heads up! I looked up just in time to catch the package. I was lying on my cot, trying to ignore the heat that invaded the ship at this time of day. I was sketching to distract myself. Stuff I saw around the ship, my fellow shipmates, trying not to think about things I'd heard about going down on the shore. The devastation was hard to take, no matter that our countries were at war. The people were just people. They had families. They had dreams. I reminded myself of that every single day. It became far too easy to get trigger-happy when you thought of the people as others. Not that I was going to shoot anybody out at sea. Just people. They were just people. Of course, some of those people absolutely did want to fucking kill us, so I never dropped my guard either. We weren't out here to weave baskets or sing Kumbaya. We were here to keep the peace and keep the good old U.S. of fucking A on top. The package that hit my chest with a thud, making me drop my pad and thin charcoal stick I clutched in my soot-covered hand. Your fingers are always dirty, man. It's nasty. I waved my fingers at Poughkeepsie Dave. We had a couple of Daves in our unit, so we used their hometowns to tell them apart. Your mother likes them just fine, I said with a straight face. I guess she likes it nasty. Fuck you, he said mildly, coming to sit on the cot next to mine. What'd you get? Care packages were a big deal around here. Just last week, someone's old lady sent a handheld fan and a whole mega pack of batteries. That thing had been passed around until it broke. It barely made a breeze, but in this heat, even the tiniest whiff of fresh air was kind of amazing. And we were lucky. At least we got to sleep on the water. There were plenty of grunts out there in the desert 24/7. The batteries had made poker a whole lot more interesting for the past 7 days, even without the fan. Batteries were like gold here. They trumped just about everything. Books, magazines, candy, and cured meat were also easy to trade. Basically any creature comfort or anything that reminded us of home was in high demand. Of course, I didn't have a sweetheart or a wife like lots of the guys. I didn't even have a mama to send me anything. Thankfully, I did have my cousin Donahue and his mama. She'd taken me in when I was a teen. I would have ended up in foster care if it weren't for her. And my cousin Donnie was the older brother I'd never had. Probably better than most big brothers, because we skipped the fighting over toys growing up part. By the time I came to live with them, Donnie and I were both more interested in grown-up toys. I fucking loved that son of a bitch. I'd learned all about motorcycles from him. Women, too. I joined his club right before I shipped out. I was still a probationary member, but apparently they were letting me do some of that proby time on this rust bucket. Devlin, the club prez, said I was serving our country in the Navy, and that was good enough for him. I fucking loved that son of a bitch, too. I loved all the guys, especially the crew we called the Devil's Riders. For someone who was technically an orphan, I had a big-ass family. Blood and oil. Both were thicker than water in my book. I sat up and straddled my cot, putting the box between my legs. The writing said it was from Mrs. Donahue. I grinned and tore open the package. On top was a big, flat Tupperware full of cookies. I opened it and inhaled deeply. It smelled like Sunday afternoon in her kitchen. It smelled like home. Toll House. More guys gathered around, practically drooling. I handed the cookies over, grabbing one and popping it in my mouth. Next was a package of plain white tank tops. I clutched them to my chest. We had our uniforms, but it was so damn hot, and we did so much physical activity that we were almost always soaked in sweat. These would come in handy for a quick change when we weren't on patrol. There was a big bottle of hand sanitizer, a 6-pack of extra-strength antiperspirant, and a bunch of non-perishable snacks. I stared at the little box of single-serve packages full of electrolyte powder. We sweated so much, dehydration was a constant threat. Mrs. Donahue really did think of everything. There was a beautiful sketch done by my cousin, whom I considered a little sister. I lifted the artwork and saw that there was something from Donnie, too. I rolled my eyes as the sailors around me started to whoop and holler. At the very bottom of the box was a magazine full of busty blondes. Only blondes, apparently. My cousin definitely had a type. And from the last letter I got from his mother, it sounded like he'd finally met his match. A pretty little waitress named Sally had caught his eye and was giving him a run for his money. I couldn't imagine any woman making Donahue work for it, but apparently she was. I was sorry I wasn't there to watch the guy chasing his own tail to get her attention. Donahue was a chick magnet, and that was even before he joined the upper ranks of the biggest motorcycle club in Southern California. My cousin had a silver tongue, muscles, height, tats, dark hair, blue eyes, and Irish good looks. And I didn't even get into his talent at metalsmithing and creating outrageous custom bikes. Women literally lined up to give him a little fun, no questions asked. But apparently, he was chasing a shy little waitress all around. I couldn't wait to give him the business about it when I got home. I wasn't much for talking shit, but when it came to Donnie, I would happily talk smack until the cows came home. He was the one who had taught me to do it when I was a shy little 15-year-old with nowhere to go and no hope of being wanted. But they had wanted me. Despite everything they'd been through, and it was more than their fair share, their branch of the Donahues had wanted me. I tossed the blondes to the crowd and smiled at what was underneath. He'd sent me something else, too. Something way better than a skin mag. A fresh sketch pad and a Ziploc baggie full of guitar picks and carpenter pencils, my favorite kind. The cookies were nearly gone, but I managed to snag one more as my buddy started another game of poker, using the spoils from other care packages that had just come in. I wasn't playing today. I leaned back on the bed and started to sketch. Chapter 1. Mac. "Ginger ale," I said as I slid the frosty mug across the bar. Jack grunted his thanks and took a sip. The man loved his ginger ale. My cousin Donnie rarely worked the bar anymore, but he still showed up some nights wanting to serve drinks. He said it kept him sharp. He never stayed late, though. Not with a 3-year-old, a baby, and a beautiful wife at home. A very beautiful, very talented, very sweet wife who never nagged him. He just couldn't wait to be with her. It was hilarious, and we all gave him shit for it, but he didn't mind. Donnie was too damn happy to care. But he was a devil's rider, and everyone was at the club tonight, so he was there too. The guys with wives would leave before things got nuts, but for now, all of them were there. Devlin was making the rounds and talking to the guys. Calloway was working in the designated club-only tattoo parlor next door and kept running into the bar for shots of tequila. Thankfully, he was so talented it didn't matter if he got a little lit. Whiskey was sitting with Jack and talking about woodwork and carpentry. Lucky was arm-wrestling Drake at a table nearby, and I was there. But I was usually at the clubhouse most nights. I wasn't much for staring at the TV. I'd rather be around my brothers, even if the inner circle wasn't here late night. God knows what else I'd be doing. Staring at the ceiling, most likely. Donnie poured me a shot and toasted me. "I have to be up at 5, I said to my crazy-ass cousin. "Man up! You can do that job in your sleep." I snorted and took the shot. Just one, though. It was true I could do most jobs in my sleep, but this was the biggest project I'd ever taken lead on. Overseeing the construction, permits, and crew for a new housing development was a big deal, and I wanted to be at my best. Not for the clients, who were a bunch of suits I'd barely talked to, but I had to be on top of my shit for the people who would live there someday, the families and kids, but especially for my crew. A good foreman could make or break the daily grind for the workers, and I wanted it to go smooth and easy. A couple of guys I'd served with were coming aboard, along with a couple of guys from the club. Then there was my normal crew and every damned guy who knew how to use a hammer in a 50-mile radius. Like I said, it was a big fucking job. I watched Cal come into the bar, deftly sidestepping one of the more determined sweetbutts who tried to waylay him. He was the prettiest guy in the damn club, except maybe for Devlin. Power, muscles, and pretty boy good looks were apparently catnip to a certain kind of woman. Then again, they also seemed to love the silent mountain in front of me, also known as Jack. Rugged and imposing, sure, but there was nothing pretty about the Viking. Of course, he had a woman who would scare the hell out of any girl who thought they could tempt him. They couldn't, of course. The man was hooked. Plus, Janet would scratch their eyes out if they even tried. Her temperament was well known around town, so he didn't deal with too much hassle these days from the girls who hung around looking for biker meat. The truth was they offered themselves to all of us on a frequent basis. The younger, unmarried guys might take advantage sometimes. Hell knows Calloway used to, but hardly any of the group were still single. Me and Drake, Kyle, who was one of my crew, and a Marine on leave, and Nick, one of the second-year prospects we'd all welcomed into the fold. Mostly we just liked hazing him. He barely reacted. He was an uber-relaxed southern boy with a twang in his voice who always looked like he'd just ridden in on a horse. He just happened to be metal. There was no rough stuff with the hazing anymore, though. Dev had put his foot down after what happened to Whiskey, and that had been before my time, while I was serving. But we still loved fucking with the prospects and anyone who seemed to take themselves a little too seriously. It was an unspoken rule. Get too high on yourself, and we were here to cut you down to size. We considered it our duty to keep each other honest and humble. Some of us were harder to get to than others. Cal and Lucky were still trying to figure out a way to prank Jack, for example. I could have told them that the only way in hell that was ever going to happen was if they enlisted Janet to be in on the joke. That woman could prank the fucking FBI. She was that devious. Yeah, the men of the Devil's Riders might be big and strong, but the women were the truly fierce ones. Kaylee, Janet, Sally, Becky, Molly, and Kirsten, a.k.a. Angel, were like lionesses protecting their pride. I was just lucky to be included in the Devil's Riders family, and I would never forget it. Family wasn't the sort of thing you should ever take for granted. Donahue skedaddled when a couple of giggling young women approached the bar. I took their order and then made a round of tropical drinks for them. They were lucky the bar was well stocked. Drake, Kyle, Nick, and the other prospects were doing a really good job with the grunt work around here. I might even tell them that if they didn't piss me off for a day or two. Donnie only came back to lean against the bar when the girls were gone. I gave him a smirk. He was so scared of upsetting his wife that he literally ran when he saw women on the prowl. I could have told him that ignoring them completely was the best way to avoid them. Running just made them more aggressive. The truth was, the club girls had given up on me, for the most part. I was polite but firm when approached for sex. What I wanted in a woman was different from what they were offering. I wanted someone shy, someone real but still sweet. I wanted a girl who hadn't been around the block a million times, ladylike and feminine. I didn't have a type beyond that. I wasn't the kind of guy to pick apart women or qualify them by body part. I wasn't an ass man or a boob man. I wasn't the type to go looking for a girl either. In the past, girls had always fallen into my lap. But maybe it was time. I wasn't meeting pretty girl-next-door types hanging around with these degenerates, that was for sure. Between work and the clubhouse, I wasn't interacting with anyone. I certainly wasn't meeting a lot of sweet little peaches. Even worse, Donnie had started dropping hints about setting me up. It was embarrassing to think my cousin thought I had no game. He acted like I couldn't find my own woman. The truth was, I just hadn't bothered to try.
Chapter 2. Suzanna. The sound of bulldozers nearly broke my concentration as I carefully lowered the seedling into the dirt. Planting them at this stage was a very delicate operation. I'd nurtured the plucky little sprouts from germination, and now they were ready to start growing on their own, as long as I didn't squash them by accident. "Oh, for the love of—" I hissed as I readjusted the fragile little plant so it was sitting high on the manure I'd piled up below the fragile root ball. "You just ignore those noisy machines now. They won't be here forever. Just enjoy the sun and all that yummy compost I mixed into your soil." Yes, I knew talking to my plants might seem crazy to an outsider, but I'd read multiple studies that talking helped them grow. I knew logically that it was probably just the CO2 that we exhaled, but it didn't matter. I liked talking to them. Besides, who else was I going to talk to? Your new neighbors, my mind whispered sarcastically. 500 of them. Today was the day they broke ground on the massive housing development next door. I was still furious after trying to block the sale, plans, and permits of the place. I'd hit roadblock after roadblock every time. Even worse, I became a shrew in the process, something I'd never imagined I would become. I was a friendly, easygoing sort of girl. Or at least I had been when it hadn't felt like me against the world. I sighed and looked at the greenhouse window. I moved out here to get away from people, I grumbled to my reflection. I just wanted to cultivate organic heirloom seeds. The plants don't like noise and pollution, and neither do I. I could have cried. My safe little hiding place, the adorable cottage left to me by my paternal grandmother, was no longer so safe or quiet. It was the one thing I had left from my family. I was alone in the world. I'd felt so battered by the world after David died. He'd been a good husband, a good man. Not exactly fiery in the passion department, but we'd had a safe, quiet life. And then just a few months after his cancer diagnosis, he was gone. It was that fast. Neither of us had time to prepare ourselves, though there really wasn't a way to prepare for that, was there? Just like that, it was over. I was a widow, and I had to start again. So I'd quit my job in the city, sold off most of my stuff back east, moved out all the way out here, and dusted off Grandma's old slipcovers. Out back, I discovered a beat-up old greenhouse. I'd forgotten it was there. It was painted white wood and old glass, many of the panes cracked. It was perfect. A sunny patch in the midst of all the trees, an oasis of calm. The ideal place for me to lick my wounds and my plants to thrive, eventually starting to become a real business. Hard work, pure, fresh rainwater, clean air, and blissful quiet. 3 years of it. Until now. Now it was all ruined. I wrinkled my nose at the smell of fresh asphalt being laid. The roads that would connect the god-awful McMansions they were undoubtedly building over there. I could have cried. I had cried many times, but mostly out of frustration. I'd felt so powerful when I was in New York, with my stable career in marketing and my perfect husband and life. It had been an illusion, though. I thought I could control everything. Until David got sick. Even the best doctors in the world hadn't been able to help him. I'd managed to avoid the world since then. It no longer seemed like a friendly place. I was better off just hiding out and puttering with my plants. I'd fixed up the greenhouse as best I could and was still trying to get the cottage into better shape. The business barely made any money so far, but it was a little more every year. No matter what, I knew I didn't want to go back to the rat race. David had shown me that life was too short for that. So I ran my tiny online heirloom seed business, and that was enough. I lived frugally. I certainly couldn't afford to have workmen come and fix the things that needed doing, so I made do, and I learned to live with imperfection. There was something kind of poetic in the peeling paint and cracked window panes. Because that's what life was, wasn't it? Imperfect. At best, you had things good for a time, but in the end, it was a long and lonely crapshoot. It was better to stay safe and live small, not attract attention. There were fewer chances of getting hurt in the process if you laid low. Fighting the development had made me stick my neck out, but no more. It hadn't done a damn thing to stop the monstrosity next door anyway. I grabbed a cup of coffee and shut all the windows. I could still hear the sounds of heavy equipment, but it was a little less invasive. I decided to take a break and do some paperwork. I slid into the rickety old chair behind my desk, which, to be honest, was also pretty rickety. The thing swayed so much that it sometimes felt like I was at sea. I stared at the computer while I waited for the day's orders to load. I was so proud of my little business, humble as it was. I'd even had one of my old marketing buddies do the logo. It was chunky antique black lettering with a burgundy and gold frame. It looked authentic and cool and old school, just the way I wanted it. I began by salvaging some of the scraggly survivors from the 100-year-old garden and started harvesting the seeds. I even started buying seeds on message boards and searching out plants in some of the old houses and farms in town. And just like that, Suzanna Seeds was officially in business. It wasn't the kind of money I was used to from working for a large advertising firm. In fact, it wasn't any money at all those first few years. But it was so much more satisfying and relaxing. Or it had been, until now. A moment of silence. I closed my eyes in bliss as the soft chirping of birds filled the air. I reached for my cup of coffee as a jackhammer started, making me nearly drop my cup. I stared down at my striped shirt and floral apron, now covered in my delicious wasted coffee. I drank the last bit in the cup with a grimace. That's it! I have had enough. I shoved my bare feet into a pair of dark green striped wellies and stomped out the door.
Chapter 3. Mac. I was looking at my clipboard with Drake, going over the groups and subgroups we had working on site today. I frowned at the sudden silence. All the mechanical noises had stopped. I looked up to see that everyone had stopped working. Drake let out a low wolf whistle. I turned around to see what everyone was staring at.
Excuse me.
A girl stood there. No, not a girl. She was a woman. A very, very pretty woman. She looked like a rainbow had exploded. She wore blue and white stripes and flowers, and her bare, shapely, very sexy legs were wedged into big rain boots. It should have been too much, too girly, too loud. But it wasn't. I couldn't look away.
Who's in charge here?
She asked peevishly. Slowly I raised my hand, my eyes devouring her. I'd never seen a girl who looked like that. She was almost too pretty. But she wasn't dolled up. It was all natural. She honestly looked like she didn't care that she was standing in a crowd of dozens of men. She wasn't here to get our attention, although she more than had it. She came closer and I squinted my eyes. Was that dirt on her cheek? I'm in charge, ma'am.
Ma'am?
She looked outraged. I guess she didn't like being called that. I would have to remember that if I wanted to piss her off again. She sure was pretty when she was mad. Huge hazel eyes peered at me belligerently, intelligent, thick-lashed eyes that looked almost gold in the sunlight. A mop of golden brown hair was shoved haphazardly on at the top of her head with wavy tendrils, spilling everywhere, revealing a slender, elegant neck and a stubborn jaw. High cheekbones, a cute-as-hell button nose, and lush, unbelievably sexy lips that begged for a man's kisses. Not any man's. Mine. I could hardly believe the way I was reacting to this woman. I was looking for a shy, quiet girl, I reminded myself. But this gorgeous rainbow tornado in front of me had wiped that notion away. Her mouth wasn't the only part of her that was speaking to me. Despite the bright and colorful clothes, the woman didn't look crazy. She was far too stacked to look anything but hotter than hell, curvy from top to bottom and in all the right ways. I started to grin at her like a buffoon, not realizing the danger I was in. She marched right up to me, and I couldn't help but notice the way her chest jiggled. Man, I wanted to lay hands on her and see how buoyant those curves really were. Her jeans were tight, worn in, patched, and shredded in spots. But she hadn't bought them that way. No, I could tell she'd earned those patches. I faintly registered the sharp-looking clippers hanging from her belt before she tore into me. A gardener. She's a gardener, I thought as I smiled at her stupidly.
Disturbing the peace. Non-stop noises, which is really not good for the plants, and the smells coming through the trees are toxic.
The smells? I asked politely, which earned me a scowl. She sure was pretty when she was fired up.
Yes, You can't come in here to tear down trees and just make it smelly and noisy.
Noisy?
Yes. Since early this morning. It's almost 2, and there hasn't been a moment of silence. Don't you take lunch?
We take it in shifts.
What about your neighbors? What if they want a lunch break?
Something about the sound of her voice snapped me out of my trance. I looked at her again, really seeing her, and not just focusing on how damn sexy she was. She looked like she was on the verge of tears. Neighbors? There isn't anybody out here. Just one crazy... I stopped, looking at her again. You're Suzanna, I said flatly. The developers had warned me about her. They'd said she was batshit crazy and a pain in the ass. They had failed to mention that she looked like a swimsuit model and smelled like sunshine and peaches. She crossed her arms, which only served to highlight her spectacular rack.
Yes,
she said, jutting her chin out. But she was putting up a brave front. She was really upset, and I found myself feeling bad about it. Look, I started, not sure how to handle this. She'd battled the big guys and lost, and now she was here, on my first day, creating a scene. It was hard to stay mad at her, though, looking the way she did. We have permits. I'm really sorry we're disturbing you, but we have the right to be here.
How long is this going to go on? All this, she waved her hand in the air, hubbub?
I almost smiled. No wonder the real estate developers had thought she was an old lady. They must have only dealt with her on paper, without ever laying eyes on her. She lived alone in the woods and used words like hubbub when she was yelling at you. It was damn cute. But I didn't much like the thought of her living out here all alone, especially with the way my guys were looking at her. Not that any of my crew would mess with a woman, but I didn't know all these guys. And she'd basically announced her location, stomping over here on foot like that. She had no idea that she was the equivalent of a juicy steak, marching herself into a pack of hungry wolves. I had a feeling Suzanna did not have a clue how many hard dicks there were at this exact moment with her name written all over them, mine included. This section should be completed within the year. The whole site, well, I scratched my chin. We're on a 5-year plan. Her jaw dropped. Literally dropped. Her chest started moving up and down really fast. I was drooling at the sight of those gorgeous tits bobbing when I realized she was hyperventilating. The woman looked like she might faint. I grabbed for her arm, holding her up when she swayed against me. Some girls might do that to be cute or flirtatious, but Suzanna was really on the verge of fainting. It wasn't an act. I'm Mac. Come on, let's sit down for a minute. We can talk. She stared at me distrustfully. I didn't mention that she was still in my arms. I was enjoying the feel of her against me way too much. It had been years since I'd held a woman, and I'd never even seen a woman who looked like her, let alone touched one. I wanted to savor it.
Here?
She looked around.
There are people staring.
She took a step back and I let her go, holding my arm out to catch her if she faltered again. She crossed her arms over her chest protectively. I exhaled and asked her if she had walked here, even though I knew the answer.
Yes. There's a path. A deer path that comes through this way.
I nodded. I'd seen it. I knew we were disrupting the wildlife around here, and apparently the very pretty local inhabitants as well. I'll walk you back, I said, barely recognizing the gruff sound of my own voice. It wasn't a question. I took her arm and waited. She blinked at me and then nodded. We walked in silence through the crowd. Drake was staring at me with a funny look on his face. As we passed, I growled at him, "Get everyone back to work." The path disappeared into the woods and we followed it.
You don't have to hold me up. I'm fine.
I ignored her. I wasn't letting her fall on her ass. Even if she was mad at me, she was a lady, and that wasn't happening on my watch. Her being beautiful only made touching her more enjoyable. Yeah, even her arm was sexy. We climbed steadily for 10 minutes before I saw a clearing at the top of the slope. A storybook cottage sat in the center, with raised flower beds and a rickety old greenhouse. Plants grew everywhere in a wild but somehow cohesive riot of color. It was the kind of place that shouldn't even exist anymore. It didn't.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?